Pardon the interruption. I am Sam Mulberry in Arden Hills, Minnesota, and I am joined by
Annie Berglund in Yeongdeungpo District, Seoul, South Korea, coming to you at 10 p.m.
Yeah, and for me, this is 7:55, so 9 a.m., so a little bit of a time gap here. Annie, we are here to talk about Christianity and Western culture. This is the kickoff webisode to kind of introduce the class to students, introduce some of the things they're going to encounter over the course of the next 7 weeks or so. So maybe let's start with this. Annie, what is CWC? Why do students take a course like this?
Oh, man. Sam, you gave me the question I feel like I could spend the next, weeks and weeks talking about the answer to, but I'll give you a little preview. So this course, as you can tell in the name, is a survey history of Western civilization, but specifically and uniquely to Bethel, it's through the lens of Christian history. So a lot of universities, especially universities, liberal arts colleges, will have a Western Civ course that's required, especially for first-year students. But what Bethel does uniquely is they pair this history with history of theology, a history of the church. We also talk about philosophy. We study some literature, some theater, especially in the first unit. So it's kind of a broad spectrum of different disciplines looking over the span of the last 2,000 plus years of the story of how we got to be where we are as Christians. So we spend a lot of time asking questions about what it means to be Christians, during different time periods. We dig into the historical context to try to better understand these individuals and events that center around Christians from the past. So we actually start out the course not with Christians. We start out before that, and we kind of pave the way to the world that Christ is born in. So the first couple readings you're going to have in this class are from ancient Greece. Then we'll move into the Roman Empire. We'll talk about Judaism. So all these different cultural contexts for where Christ was born. And then we move on through Christianity as persecution to Christianity in a period of toleration. How do Christians define themselves or see themselves then when persecution goes away and they start to become powerful and have authority? So really what this class does, I have like 3 objectives, Sam, and I don't know if this is going to cover everything, so you might need to jump in. But I think the first objective is that it helps us to cultivate empathy. So Christianity and Western culture is not about memorizing dates, right? There's very few dates that you're going to actually have to memorize. What I think it's more asking us to do is to think about what it would be like to live in these different times and different places, especially in the context of being a Christian and having Christian moral values. How would it be like to be a Christian in first century AD? Versus today. Another objective I think that we do in this class is we try to challenge or sharpen or reconsider even our own perspectives on our beliefs, on our culture, on our faith, on what it means to identify as a Christian. So it's again about listening to Christians who lived decades ago, centuries ago, millennia ago, and considering how we can shape ourselves based on what we learn from other people. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more in section 2 of this episode. And finally, we ask a lot of big questions. And one of the biggest ones is, who am I? So this course does ask you to evaluate yourself within this history of Christianity and say, if I identify as a Christian, what does that mean about what I believe? What does it mean about what I do with that? How do I interact with other people, with cultures around me, with people who are different or similar to me? So there's a lot of big questions that we tackle in this class. And as somebody who has taught it mostly during regular terms, I'm curious to ask you, Sam, why would we do CWC online?
That's a really great question, and I think there's a couple ways to approach this. At one level, there is the obvious level of convenience, right? We're taking this in the summer. This is an asynchronous online course, so you're not locked into a particular time. Although we're going to be doing stuff every day in this course, so it provides some flexibility, right? This is a course for some of you taking this class. I'm sure it's because you have a really tight major or probably majors, and you're trying to fit your gen ed courses in. So doing it online in the summer allows for some flexibility with that. But there are some things that we can do in the online course that are actually easier to do online than they are in a regular face-to-face course. So here's an example. This course has been part of the Bethel's curriculum since the mid-'80s. It's a core piece of Bethel's curriculum. It's laying out some of those big questions you talk about, as really setting up other gen ed courses you're going to take. It's always been a team taught course, but when we do this online, it allows us to bring in even more people into our classroom. So normally CWC is taught by 4 professors from different fields. In this summer online course, you're going to encounter, I think, 22 CWC props from a variety of fields within the humanities, but even beyond the humanities. We're going to look at some people in the sciences joining us in class at certain points to talk. So we're really expanding this idea of this is a course which is taught by the whole Bethel faculty in lots and lots of ways. The format of the course also allows for some flexibility. So there's going to be 2 types of, 3 types of ways that the course is going to be delivered to you. First is through a series of 10 documentary films that we made. And here's where we're going to have a lot of voices from across Bethel in these films. And the point of the documentary films is they're going to kind of lay out big chunks of the narrative of the course, the story of the course. And those are going to be paired with primary source readings. When we say primary source, that means readings which were written in the historical time period. So you talked about we're going to be reading from folks from ancient Greece, things like that. So we're actually going to be reading their words, right? We're going to read, the words of ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, people like that. So those short primary source readings are going to be paired with the documentaries because we really want to give you multiple voices, multiple perspectives. And that touches on that idea of empathy that you talked about. The other way that the course is going to be delivered is through a series of online museums. So we created these virtual spaces that you can move through, and like any physical spaces aren't particularly linear, right? They allow you to move in different directions, to sort of follow where your interests go. And that's how we built these museums. So when you're in these online museums, you're not going to be on a track. You're going to be walking through, noticing things, looking at things. We're going to assign you certain places like, oh, go to this room and look at this thing. But there's going to be all this other stuff as well, because we want this to be guided by you as well. When you go into these museums, there is way more content in there than you're expected to be responsible for. We do that because we want you to be able to make some choices. That also means it allows us to put in more content than we could do in a face-to-face course. In a face-to-face course, we have 70 minutes, and whatever the speaker's talking about, that's what we're talking about. In the museums, if we're doing something that should take you 70 minutes, we may include 3 hours of audio content in there that you may or may not encounter, right? So if you get really interested in a particular topic, there's a chance for you to dive deeper. We want you to follow your passions a little bit as you're taking this course. So we're going to have those documentary films. We're going to have the museums. But Annie, there's one other component to this course, and that's what we're doing right here. We're going to periodically, I think 7 times throughout the next 7 weeks, we're going to do webisodes like this, where you and I are going to be talking, and what we're recording here is sort of live in the moment, as opposed to these films which we made a couple years ago. Annie, what are we doing in these webisodes, and why are we doing it?
Great question. So I'm really excited for these webisodes because it's an extra chance for me to talk with Sam about things that I really love. But I think they're also very helpful for students. So like you already learned from Sam just now, this class as an online course is interactive. It's very visual. There's so many elements of CWC I have never seen before because I did not take this online, and I want to go and see all those museums. So with all those unique opportunities, though, we don't want to take away something from an in-person class experience. So what these webisodes do is kind of extend the content into a discussion. So there's not really going to be any necessarily new content here, but it's Professor Mulberry and I talking about readings or events or people that you have encountered throughout the week, and digging a little bit deeper, actually even answering more personal questions on how these different individuals have challenged us, or how we might be able to learn from them in the 21st century. So we're going to be diving into these readings and terms. It's an opportunity for you to hear professors talk about these things. So it's like you're eavesdropping on a small group discussion. discussion. So actually during our normal semester, not online, students meet weekly in small groups, and there's time to ask questions, there's time to discuss these readings, and we don't want you to have this online CWC experience without that. So the webisodes are there to kind of take the place of a small group, give you a little bit of extra time, not only to get to know us as professors, as faculty, but also to discuss things on a more personal level.
And if they want to ask questions or interact, you can email the show at s-mulberry@bethel.edu, which is also just my email address. So feel free to email me if you have questions. If you have questions that you want us to talk about on the webisodes, do that. We would love to be interactive that way as well.
For sure. So Sam, what should students think about as they start this online course then?
I think so. I've taught this in the summer since 2013. I think was the first. Were you still a Bethel student in 2013?
Yes, I was.
That's the first year that I taught this course online, and I would say over the years, the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is to think about how you're going to manage your time. Again, it's asynchronous, so you can decide kind of when you're going to do these things, and we'll usually make a few days worth of material available ahead of time. So you can, if you're somebody who you have something coming up and you want to work ahead a little bit, you're going to be able to do that to a certain degree. We're not going to open everything up, but there'll usually be things available at least a few days out. So managing your time is really important, because almost every day of this course, every weekday, I should say, almost every weekday, there's going to be something due. So you can't allow yourself to get behind. Now, I will say students tend to do pretty well in this course. The students who struggle are students who get behind or find themselves just skipping a day and not turning something in. That's gonna really dramatically impact how you do in this course. So I would say just plan on, for the next 7 weeks, that you have each day. I mean, this is a 4-credit course, so we should be thinking about really like kind of 3 hours a day, to do all of the work that you're going to be doing in this course, and making sure you're getting your assignments in. We talked a little bit about primary source readings, which are available in PDFs on the Moodle site. When you're reading those, be thinking about kind of, why did we assign this reading? What are the big ideas? Look for details that you can use to answer questions. So in the study guide for the course, you're going to see theme questions, which could potentially appear as essays on your exams. So be looking at those themes and think about, well, how do these readings speak into that theme? With the vocabulary in the course, on the study guide, there's a list of vocabulary, both recognition terms and mastery terms. And in the study guide, it talks about what you need to do with those. But with the recognition terms, you need to know who or what the term is, when it is, where it is. And for those mastery terms, you need to know all 3 of those things, plus why is that term significant? Why is it important? Annie, what would you do for students if they're trying to think about kind of how to figure out how or why a term is significant?
Oh, I always tell students the tendency is to take significance and instead make it a who or what. And so instead of just defining somebody, let's say we'll use Martin Luther King Jr. as an example, because he's one of the first people that students meet in this class. Instead of, for his significance, saying he was a civil rights activist, well, that's certainly true, and obviously his main significance, but try to think of more far-reaching significances, or those that impact Christianity in Western culture, right? So think of it in a larger picture of the narrative of CWC. So not just what his job was, not just that he was a preacher, but dig in a little bit further. Oftentimes, our mastery terms are already linked up with a reading as well. So a lot of our primary sources are written by authors who are mastery terms. So when that's the case, you can look at the significance as, what are those readings saying about those, about how significant this author is, right? What are their main ideas? Why is that maybe challenging the status quo? Why is that aligning with the status quo? So there's all these bigger questions of why and how that should be going into your points of significance.
Fantastic. And the last piece of advice I would say is you're going to have, like I said, this daily homework. And it's possible to go through the course and just like, I'm just going to do what I need to do to complete the daily homework for each day. and that will be fine until you get to the exam. Make sure you're also looking at that study guide. When you're going through each day's material, have your eye both on what is assigned for this day, but also what is the vocabulary I need to do? What are the readings that I need to do, not just to answer that question, but to prepare for the exam, because those things are going to be really important when you get to those exams.
For sure. And those are all questions that you can also ask us through email too. So if it's something that you want to go over in our small group, or webisodes is what we call them on the online course, that's something that you can email to s-mulberry@bethel.edu, and we can go over some of those terms, hopefully during the webisode. So Sam, what does the first assignment end up looking like for students?
All right, so we have 2 things we want you to complete by the end of the first day of class, which is Wednesday, June 16th. So these are due by 11:59 p.m. You can do them ahead of time if you would like, but they need to be done by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, June 16th. The first is there's the syllabus quiz. It's a short quiz to just make sure that you've looked over the syllabus, the study guide, that you've watched this webisode. You can take that as many times as you want. So you should get all the points for it, but just make sure you go in and take that, and you know that, and you look at those documents and you know what the course is going to look like. The second thing is we will have a discussion post that should be the same place you're finding this video on Moodle. There should be a discussion post, and what we want you to do is go in and introduce yourself. So I'll start a discussion feed, and instead of having you write answers to these questions, what I want you to do is use Poodle, which is Moodle's embedded video recorder, to record an answer to these questions. So what I want you to do is basically kind of what we do on the first day of class. Introduce yourself. So record a little Poodle video. If you look on the on Moodle where you're at the place where you could type in your response, if you look on the bar above that, there's a button that's a little movie camera. Click on that, and this will allow you to record. And here's what I want you to talk about. Introduce yourself. So tell us who you are, kind of what you're majoring in, things like that. Tell us where you're going to be this summer. I'm always curious to see where our students, when they're taking summer CWC. Tell us what excites you about this course. Like, what is it that you're most excited to learn about? You've heard us talk a little bit about it. What is it that most excites you for this course? And then something else unique or interesting about you. And that can be anything from what pets you have, what are things you love to do, what makes you unique, what makes you special. Tell us a little bit about yourself, just kind of as a way to introduce yourself. So again, the syllabus quiz and the Poodle introduction video are due by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, June 16th. Annie, that is all we have for this first segment. In segment 2, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the theme verse for CWC and kind of talk a little bit about one of the big things we hope to accomplish for students as they're taking this course. So we will be right back. Well, we are back, Annie, and what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the history of this course. And by doing that, think about we talked a little bit in segment 1 about why students take this course, but I want to think about what are the core central ideas of this class. So, as I said, this course was created in the mid-1980s at Bethel, and the theme verse for the class from its very inception was Hebrews 11 through 12, 1, 2, or 3. I don't know. It always shifts around where we end in Hebrews. And I don't know if you're familiar with this chapter of Hebrew, or these chapters of Hebrews. But in Hebrews 11 is the kind of litany of the faithful, right? It's this telling of the story of the people of faith. And the author literally goes through and just says, by faith, Adam lived by faith, Abraham lived by faith, Isaac lived by faith, Jacob lived by faith, right? And it talks about the history of the faithful through the Old Testament up to the time of the writer. So it talks about this sort of long stream of history. And then as we move from Hebrews 11 into Hebrews 12, Hebrews 12 starts with this. So we have this image of all of these people of the faith who have come before. And then the author writes, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So that idea, that image of the great cloud of witnesses, what the author is invoking is this idea that all of the people of the faith, the stream of history of the people of the faith, are now passed on, right? But they are, to use the author's words, in this cloud of witnesses. So imagine them sort of floating above us, looking down on us, running the race of faith in the same way that they ran the race of faith, right? It says, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So they're watching us. They're cheering us on, right? And one of the ways that I think about this course is through this lens of this cloud of witnesses, that one of our goals is to help students recover Christian memory. I mean, this is the story of the faith is our story. So part of what we're doing here is working to recover that story, to say, because for a lot of us, let's be honest, our sense of Christian history, maybe we know the Bible really well. So we know the Old Testament, we know the New Testament, we get all the way up through the book of Acts. And then we have a little bit of a gap, and it's like, and then we have the people with gray hair in our church, right? Like that's church history. There's about 2,000 years in there that what we're going to try to do in this course is say, well, let's recover that history of the faith. Let's expand our cloud of witnesses. So that's one of the big things that we're going to be doing through this course is expanding sort of this, all of our sense of who are the people of the faith that came before us. And we're going to introduce some people you've probably never met before. We're going to it's going to be like uncovering a family tree. And as you know, with any family tree, there's sometimes tensions and disputes and arguments. We're going to see Christians who don't agree with each other. I mean, that's a big part of this course is thinking about disagreement between these people. And it's impossible to agree with everyone that we're going to read from and study in this course, because embedded in this is these sort of debates and disagreements and the working out and negotiation of what Christianity is, what faith is. And we're going to be providing lots of different perspectives on that. So that's what we're going to be doing in this course. So what I want to do in this segment is introduce students to you and I a little bit, because, students, you're becoming part of our cloud of witnesses. We hopefully are becoming part of your cloud of witnesses as well. Now, you and I both have a pretty unique story with CWC because we are among, I think, 4 people in the history of CWC who have taken the course, TA'd for the course, and taught the course. So we are both Bethel graduates. So I'm sort of curious, what year did you take CWC?
I took it for the first time in fall 2010.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit, just sort of tell me your CWC story from like, this is what it was like as a student up through teaching the course.
Yeah, okay, so I took it in fall 2010. I was a history major, social studies ed major, so I declared that right away. I knew I wanted to study history, so CWC was really exciting for me to kind of have as like, it's a gen ed, but for me, I was taking it like this was one of my like huge core content of my time at Bethel, right? So I was taking it really seriously. Yet I met in my class the man who would become my future husband. So you can take this course seriously and also make great friendships and relationships out of it. Not to add that weird pressure, but
well, that puts a lot of pressure on like creating your poodle video, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. No, so yes, my husband Mike and I met in CWC. But I took that fall semester, and then I had an interview with Sam the following spring. I was going between hopefully being a CWC TA, but my backup was working at Chipotle. So luckily for the folks who know me and know I can't cook and make food at all, like luckily I got the TA job. Didn't have to make people some pretty crappy burritos. And I was really excited. So I TA'd for 4 terms. It was a way where I was able to expand my own teaching ability too, and really dive into content. And I realized like every term that I took it, not only as a student, but as a TA, sitting in the class, taking notes just like any other student would, every single time it hit in a different way, right? Like there's always something new to learn, and different ways of seeing these different authors. based on what's happening around me. I mean, like recently, the pandemic has been a big experience where it colors the way that I see a lot of the readings from this class, or, whatever happens to be going on in current events. So then I graduated, I student taught and taught around the metro for a bit. And got my master's in Seoul, South Korea. So I moved to Korea for the first time in 2016 through 2018. Then I came back to the States and I worked at the Minnesota Senate. And the whole time I kept in contact with Sam, who messaged me at some point and said, "Hey, would you be open to teaching CWC this fall 2018?" And yes, it was an extreme yes. I was really excited and floored and had to reread these messages over and over again to realize that this is real life. So this is something that I will forever be happy that I got to teach this course. And I am teaching with professors who taught me this content, which is pretty wild. And that's something that is your experience too, right, Sam? Like, I feel like my story is your story, except for you can one-up me in basically every single way.
Right, just a little bit. So I was a freshman in the fall of 1995. I didn't come to Bethel as a history major. I was a computer science major, and I took CWC because it was a required course, so it was on my schedule. I took it, and I really loved it. I loved the history of ideas. I loved thinking about how ideas change over time, about how the context, what's happening at a given time period shapes the way people respond to it and shapes the different responses to it. So I love the course. So I, like you, applied to be a teaching assistant for the class because I thought, well, that way I get paid to take the class again, but I don't have to take the test. I just get to go listen to these really cool profs talk about stuff. So I was hired to TA for the class, and in fall of my sophomore year, I was leading a workshop to help students prepare for an exam, and I just had this moment. I was standing in front of probably 70 students in the Bethel choir room, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is actually what I want to do with my life. So that the next day I changed my major from computer science to history and decided my life's dream was to teach a course like CWC. So I graduated from Bethel. I spent a year teaching high school art in Mobile, Alabama through a Catholic volunteer program. Went to graduate school at the University of Minnesota, came back to Bethel in 2001. So I was 24 years old when I started teaching CWC, and I've taught it ever since. So this is my 20th year teaching CWC. I feel like I'm definitely around or over 50 semesters in the course. So I've been through this class a lot. I coordinate the TAs for the course. So Annie was one of my great TA hires. I met my wife through CWC as well. We were both TAs together in the late 90s. So yeah, CWC has just really become part of my life. So I say that in part, both of you and I are examples of this is a course that a lot of students will take, and you'll learn a lot of stuff and it'll be great. But some of you may take this and it might shape the rest of your destiny for the rest of your life. So you never know. You've been warned. Annie, I want to close this segment by thinking about this idea of the cloud of witnesses, right? So when you think about your experiences in this class, can you think of people who you would include in your cloud of witnesses, who you maybe learned about through CWC or learned to a greater depth in CWC?
Yeah, I really like the way that you talked about this earlier, and you talked about family, and I wrote that down too when I was thinking about this. That it's the cloud of witnesses, right? So we already have this nice analogy, this nice visual, but I also think of it as kind of like a religious family tree, right? It's at first, in my early Christian days, it's the people who poured into me the most, right? It's my parents, my relatives who are directly, maybe my pastor at my church. But what this course does is you start to see the ways that voices from people centuries ago are still living on in those people that have been, they're the witnesses in your life from birth, right? It's those people that are closest to you. You can kind of recognize some of the philosophy, some of the belief systems, and where they originated and how you got to be where you are, right? And similar to family, there's that kind of cheesy saying about, friends are the family you choose, right? I think that the clouds of witnesses are there's some choice in that too, right? They're all impacting to different degrees. But I also like the idea that I get to somewhat choose the people that I really want to impact me even more so, like to a greater degree, that I will look to help me answer some questions about the culture and society around me as a Christian. So two of the people who do that for me would be MLK Jr. So this is, again, one of the first people you meet in CWC. We do this course in a way where we start in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, and then we go back all the way to ancient Greece, right? So what I really like about MLK Jr. is that in this class, he's kind of bookends for content. And it helps us to start with somebody who is relatively close to our time period. Certainly, the things that he's speaking to, the idea of civil rights and racial injustice, that those are still conversations that are being had in 21st century America, in our churches, in our governments. And there's still so many questions about how to make our society more just, how to find those laws that are unjust, and to make sure that our ears and our eyes are open to injustice. So I find him to be really important for those reasons, just because they're ever present. And I also like it because most students have read MLK before. Most students have read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, but this time, instead of reading it strictly as a historical document, I think what we do is dive in more and think about themes of justice and law and order, and how faith interacts with all of those different cultural values that sometimes can be competing. And they're all important values, but they conflict, and they are always relevant to our lives. So that's why I really think MLK is especially important, because of his relevance, not only to issues of civil rights and racial injustice, but also to bigger ideas of justice and injustice. And then the second, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I'll do one, and then we can maybe go back and forth. So one person that I would add is Augustine of Hippo. So he's a 4th, 5th century North African Christian, and we'll encounter him towards the end of the first unit of CWC. And what fascinates me about him is he is somebody who couldn't be more different than me. I mean, I grew up in southern Minnesota. He grew up in Roman North Africa. Like, it's just like and I'm living in the 20th, 21st century. He's living in the 4th, 5th century. Like, time, place, culture, all these things couldn't be more different. But one of the works that we'll talk about that Augustine writes is a book called Confessions. And we won't have you read the whole book in this course, but I encourage you to read it at some point. It's Augustine's spiritual autobiography. And whenever I read that book, I'm so moved by how he's so different than I am, but at the same time, there are things he talks about, observations he makes, things he struggles with. And I feel like, oh my gosh, I felt that before, or I've thought that before, or I've wondered that before. And I encourage you to look for these moments of resonance when you encounter somebody, and it may not be Augustine, it might be somebody else, but when you encounter somebody in this course where you just sort of feel this almost like hum in your chest of wow, there's something about this person that really resonates with me. And then I would say, keep track of that person's name. And, maybe when the course is over and you're like, okay, I have some time to just read something on my own, go learn more about that person, because, honor that sense that there is something that's connecting me to this person who couldn't be further and more different than I am. So who's your number 2?
Well, okay, I'm just going to build off of that, because that's also a great one. And now I wish I also said Augustine, but you restricted me to just 2. But, to piggyback off of what Sam just said, as a student in fall 2010, I took CWC. I read that excerpt from his biography. Then as a senior, at the end of my time at Bethel, I took a course called The Plot Thickens with Professor Marian Larson. And we read Frederick Buechner's autobiography. And the parallels, we didn't talk about Augustine in class, but it was something where, as I was reading that book for a different course, I realized these are very similar. And then I was able to look at my own faith journey and my own conversion. And it was really redemptive to be able to find these small moments of grace happen throughout my life, in a similar fashion to folks like Augustine or Frederick Buechner. So yes, he comes back so much. I just feel like Augustine is always like whispering things to me that I experience not just in intellectual pursuit, but also in how I interact with people around me, new Christians that I meet, or as I watch other people's faith unfold. Okay, so anyway, I love Augustine. My second person, though, is similar contextually, a little bit more so than MLK, but Perpetua. So she is someone else that you're going to be meeting in Unit 1. She is from the 200s AD, also from Roman North Africa, from Carthage. And she's a young mother. She's only in her early 20s. She's still nursing her child when she is put into prison and persecuted unto death for her faith as a Christian, because persecution was rampant in those first couple centuries after Christianity was born. So we have many accounts of martyrdom, of people shedding their blood for their faith in Christ, because it was so countercultural, so unknown from the Roman Empire perspective. So she's one of those people that, similar to your choice, Sam, with Augustine, it's like I cannot. It's a stretch for me to empathize with her, and not for the fact that I think she's inspirational, right? I think she's incredible, and her example of faith is something that I will never be able to fully empathize with, because I live in a culture where I can freely worship, and I can state to anyone anywhere that I'm a Christian and not fear any type of state-backed persecution, any personal persecution, even non-state-backed vigilante violence. None of that is something I experience ever in my life as a Christian. And so it takes a special mental exercise to be able to stretch myself into what it would be like to be a young mother, to deny your father, who is the head of your household in Roman North Africa, to deny your children, your family, your future, right? And to say that the person or the faith is what the person of Jesus and my faith in Jesus is going to be who I submit to fully, not the state, not my family. Another really important thing that you mentioned too, like, I think that people like Perpetua and Augustine are helpful for me to remember that we tend to whitewash a lot of Western civilization and its roots, or Christianity's roots in Western Civ. But here we have folks who are from North Africa. And so this isn't just a course that's about Western Europe, which perhaps is maybe what students think coming into it. But instead, we have voices from people even in Southwest Asia, or people in North Africa. We move kind of all across the globe. So this is Western Civ, but also we have these like hubs of theology and persecution occurring in Unit 1 in North Africa, and it spreads even more beyond that. Sam, what is your second cloud of witness?
The second person I want to put in my cloud of witnesses is a guy that we'll encounter towards the end of Unit 2 named Erasmus. And what I love about Erasmus is that he is this figure who who's living at a very contentious time. So he's living during the time of the Reformation, where we're going to see the church have this big split, and there's people on the Protestant side and people on the Catholic side. We're going to have warfare, we're going to have debates, all these things. And Erasmus is this person who is both critical of the Roman Catholic Church in terms of some of the abuses, some of the corruption there, but at the same time is dedicated to maintaining the unity of the church and saying reform has to happen from within the church. So he's somebody who's both Catholic but also not, and he exists in this weird liminal space. Now, I'll tell you something about myself. I grew up in the Catholic Church. I'm a Bethel grad. My faith journey is shaped by both Catholic traditions and Protestant traditions. I've lived with Catholic monks in my life. I've done all kinds of things. So I love that Erasmus exists in this space between, and that that what we'll see is that Christianity is often about those spaces between as well, to say this isn't about these grand arguments and which side are you on, but sometimes it's about trying to find those spaces in between, trying to focus on Christianity as something which can unify people rather than something which can destroy people, which we'll see both of those things happen in this course. So Erasmus is somebody we'll learn a lot more about. He's fascinating in lots of ways, but he's somebody that I'll include in my cloud of witnesses. And this was really interesting. I don't know that you and I have ever actually had this conversation, because I think we know each other's stories really well, but I'm really excited that we were able to share this with students, and hopefully they know a little bit more about us and a little bit more about the cloud of witnesses. We'll be back in just a second to wrap up the show. We are back, Annie. We always like to end these webisodes with a little happy time. So happy birthday to Canadian-American actor Michael J. Fox, the star of the Back to the Future movie franchise, turned 60 years old today. Now, for students, that may not mean much, but he is one of the great child stars of my childhood. So to hear that he's turning 60 today is tough for me to deal with. Annie, if you could travel back or forward in time, when would you go, and what type of car would you make your time machine out of?
This is quite the question. Okay, I feel like this is maybe a little too Michael J. Foxy of me, but I would want to go back and see my family like in the past, right? So I think I would go to see my great-grandparents before they immigrated from Norway and Sweden to the US, and just kind of like see what they were doing. Were they farmers? I don't really know much about their background. I've also never been to Scandinavia, but like Berglund, it's a very Scandinavian name. I've always wanted to connect with my roots, so like why not go and drink some coffee, eat some kransekake, and like meet my actual relatives. And as for a car, Sam, you know me, you know that any vehicle, large or small, I don't know cars, right? Like I've never really known cars, but the one I choose is a Hyundai Porter 3. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
Okay, let me tell you. Hands down, Hyundai Porter 3. It is a cab-over truck. It's either 2-door or 4-door. Typically, they're white or sometimes like a navy blue color, but mostly just those two colors. They are so common in South Korea. Like they're used for hauling anything and everything, construction, businesses, like whatever it is. They're all over the streets. So I feel like they're very inconspicuous. Like I could have it be my time travel machine and no one would be like, yeah, let me break into that rusty old Porter 3. I don't know. Maybe that's sketchy and a red flag, but I feel like I could go anywhere without suspicion. So I don't know.
That works.
Okay, so happy anniversary to Secretariat, who completed horse racing's Triple Crown by winning the Belmont by an astonishing 31 lengths on this day in 1973. Sam, is Secretariat the greatest athlete of the 20th century?
Now, I need to tell students this is a fraught question for you because you teach a course on animal ethics, so the idea of horse racing is probably abhorrent to you. But the idea of celebrating an animal as the greatest athlete of the 20th century is probably a positive for you. So I don't know if you're conflicted by this. I would say this. You can make the case. You can make a legitimate case that Secretariat is, if not the greatest athlete of the 20th century, like is up there. So here's what I would say. Secretariat wins horse racing's Triple Crown. So the three biggest races in horse racing, the Kentucky Derby is 1.25 miles, the Preakness is 1 mile, and the Belmont is 1.5 miles. Now, it won all three of these races. Other horses have done that. It doesn't happen very often. Other horses have done that. But Secretariat does this almost 50 years ago. Every race, it set the record for that race, which still stands to this day. So almost 50 years later, Secretariat's times are still the fastest times ever in those races, which have been run for going on 150 years. So definitely the greatest horse racing horse of all time. You know, so who are the greatest athletes of the 20th century? Well, you have your Michael Jordans, your Muhammad Ali's, your Jim Browns, your Babe Ruths. Does Secretariat fit in there? Yeah, I'm gonna say yes. Absolutely. And if you don't believe me, YouTube the 1973 Belmont and watch this horse dominate the field by so much that when you say winning by 31 lengths, you have no idea how long it takes for the second place horse to cross the finish line after Secretariat does. It's a ridiculous take, but greatest athlete of the 20th century, I'm on board.
No, Annie, I love how passionate you got about that, Sam. I would throw in Airbud as a potential second place.
Yeah, I guess maybe.
All around.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah.
Annie, happy trails to the 2021 school year. Annie, what are you most excited to have in your rear view mirror from the academic year 2021?
Man, well, I think the obvious is probably shifting out of a pandemic. Hopefully, should everything continue in the same trends we've seen, that's going to be really nice. More personally, for me, I'm really excited to be done moving internationally. Like, man, I still have to figure out things about extending visas and like finding work and looking for studio spaces for my husband, who's an artist. But having the big move done, which was done over spring break, it's just really nice to not have to think about everything that goes into moving halfway across the world, which unfortunately, Sam, you had to watch me do and give me advice and be a shoulder to cry on the entire time. So I'm sure you're also happy to have that in your rearview mirror too.
That's right. So farewell 2021, bring on 21-22. We're ready for it. Annie, that is all the time that we have for this webisode. Students, remember you have 2 assignments that are due by the end of the day on Wednesday, June 16th. You have the syllabus quiz, which again, you can take as many times as you want. You should get all the points for it. Just make sure you have looked at the syllabus, the study guide, the schedule, watch this webisode. If you're hearing my voice, obviously you watched this webisode, so you've already done part of it. So go take that syllabus quiz and then go on to the discussion board and post your Poodle video with introducing yourself. So again, who you are, major, where will you be this summer, what excites you about this course, and what is something unique or interesting about you. Just use this as a way to introduce yourself to your classmates. Don't just record a video, watch the others' videos as well. You're not just introducing yourself to me, you're introducing yourself to each other. And we will be back in sort of halfway through Unit 2, Unit 1, we'll be recording another one of these webisodes. And in the future, we'll be diving more into content, reviewing some of the things that we're talking about. So remember to look at that, look at the schedule for the course, know what you need to do each day. Assignments are typically due the following day by 10 a.m. So get those in. You can always email me at s-mulberry@bethel.edu. And I'm happy to set up a Zoom meeting with you if you have questions you want to talk about. If you have questions for us to discuss on the webisodes, please feel free to email us about those. Annie, this is what these webisodes are. Hopefully this was helpful and interesting to students, and we will be talking with you further down the line. Say goodnight, Stacy.